I was really surprised by the fact that this really did happen here.
Exhibit of feeble-mindedness. Look right here.
Mrs. Russell's absence, Mrs. Birch reported that the exhibit of feeble-mindedness comes to us Carlilians in May.
Awesome.
The cost being estimated at between, it says $50 and $60.
The exhibition came to town through the efforts of the Carlisle Civic Club. It was traveling throughout the state, but the Civic Club felt very strongly that it should come here, and it did. It was on High Street, and when you came into the exhibition, there were different booths, and all of it had information pertaining to people with intellectual disabilities. So when you first walked in, it was sort of defining what feeble-mindedness was, and it placed people in a category. So, idiot, moron, lunacy, it was all there. And as you moved through the exhibit, it talked about things like common practices, how they measure someone's IQ, what school practices existed to help people, but it also very much acknowledged that we had this weird eugenics movement, in that we thought sterilization of people with intellectual disabilities was okay, and that we were somehow going to breed this out of society, that this was a good thing, that we were going to do this to people against their own free will.
So if you had a child with disabilities, one of the first people that started talking to you, most likely, about sending your child to a state center was your medical professional. So for some families, it was a medical recommendation that they send their child to Pennhurst or Selinsgrove or Evansburg or Polk Center or Whitehaven. But institutions were not built to be, these evil places. They were based on, what the minds knew at the time. When, years and years and years ago, if you had a child who was born and they were different in some way, had epilepsy or had mental retardation, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, the only place for treatment or any sort of programming was not the community.
There was also a petition at the end of the exhibition that it asked people to sign the petition, which eventually went to Harrisburg, which petitioned for more money to expand the state school system for feeble-minded people. So I think it speaks volumes that the community felt so strongly that thousands of people in the area came out to see it, and they felt so moved by the end of it to sign the petition, which eventually led to the isolation of people with intellectual disabilities, which then eventually led to overcrowding of a system and the mistreatment of people in the institutions.
Pennhurst opened in 1908, and it was to offer programming and treatment to people with intellectual disabilities. But one of the difficulties that happened very early on is that it became serving many more people than what it was designed to serve, which certainly caused understaffing.
I think overall it's society and the community's fault that institutions became these horrible places. I think because we felt it was okay to put people away and get them out of our society so we didn't see them or have to deal with them, that the overcrowding just happened. It happened right before, I shouldn't say it happened right before everybody's eyes, because it really didn't happen right before us, but it just was allowed to happen because the belief system was such that that is what you did with someone with an intellectual disability. That was what made sense.
Over the years, the conditions really deteriorated. There were, incidents of abuse, not only by staff abusing the residents who lived there, but person to person. There certainly was a lack of treatment. It was dirty. You would go and you would visit, and people would be unclothed. The sheets weren't changed, and there were only a very limited number of professionals or staff that were then serving or providing treatment, providing care to these individuals. So, I mean, they really were overwhelmed with the amount of work that was required and the number of staff that were available to do that work.
The reason the public became aware of what was going on in the institutions was through the news media. And once that was out there and the public saw the deplorable conditions and what was going on, they couldn't unsee it.
When the ARC of Pennsylvania and a number of other organizations began the Pennhurst lawsuit, so the settlement to that lawsuit was that the state was required to put more money into community programs. So that began the deinstitutionalization movement in Pennsylvania. And CPARC at the time was probably one of the very first ARC chapters, community programs that began to open up community living arrangements, which is what they were called at the time. So that the ARC of Cumberland Perry has a long history in providing community services to people with intellectual disabilities.
Ultimately, who paid the price for this were the people with intellectual disabilities. They're traumatized. They were abused. They languished. They were neglected. We wouldn't allow that to happen today. In our community-based system today, neglect and abuse has consequences. But when this was going on, it was just allowed to happen. We are still helping support some of the survivors from institutions. People like Bob.
I mean, it's just certainly a testament to the community system as well, that 42 years later, he's doing okay.
When I think about Bob, I really view him as our institutional survivors, because they really are survivors. Atrocities happen to them. It's not okay. We should learn from those mistakes and really be able to advance their lives.
Everything in his past just hit him. He's probably thinking, these people that I trusted put me here.
He has told me in the past that he's had bad dreams about it. Would love to just wipe that from his memory, but they're there to stay.